Resident Evil is a series that has seen so much evolution throughout the years, but forever will be deeply tied to my own personal memories, like defeating Nemesis on the clock tower while hanging out with my cousins who lived out of state, or staying up late taking turns playing mercenary modes in Resident Evil 4 with my best friends. Even my first interactions with YouTube was watching these classic Resident Evil 4 videos. But probably my memory that changed my outlook on gaming the most was playing my first VR game ever when Resident Evil 7 came out. Now close to 7 years later, and within the first year of PSVR 2's launch, we have one of the most fun and popular Resident Evil games ever remade for VR. While I am super excited to talk about Resident Evil 4, I just wanted to ask real quick if you would click the like button and subscribe if you're new here and enjoy this video. It would really mean the world to me. It would also tell YouTube that I'm not the worst creator on this platform. Hey, I'm happy with second place. But with that out of the way, let's hop into
Resident Evil 4.
The Resident Evil franchise from its first release has always been an interesting narrative mix, having your typical endearing Japanese writing of American characters evenly melded together with some unnerving sci-fi storytelling with twists and turns, betrayals, and pharmaceutical corporations covering up the weird outbreaks that they caused. While all the games have bigger world connections to each other, for the most part you could play any game in the franchise and not be completely confused about what's going on within that standalone title, despite some games having much deeper connections to each other like Resident Evil 7 and Village. Resident Evil 4 was divisive among fans of the series for a number of reasons, one of which was the story and how the game had a kind of a hard time balancing the different tones it tried to convey throughout the experience. One thing is for sure though, bringing back Leon Kennedy and Ada Wong from Resident Evil 2 was a very good move, and this game only reinforced them as fan favorites. Without giving any major spoilers past the first hour or so of this 19-year-old game, the plot revolves around the US agent and former Raccoon City police officer, and it takes place 6 years after the events of Resident Evil 2. Leon is on a mission in Spain to locate the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, that was abducted by a strange cult called Los Illuminos. Soon after arriving in the rural village in Spain, Leon finds out the locals have been infected with Las Plagas. This allows certain members of the cult to enact mind control tactics on those infected, and while searching for Ashley, Leon himself becomes infected with the parasite. The strange and wacky plot that ensues in hindsight all these years later honestly feels like a good reason to have the game set in a very different location than the prior games, prop up some really cool monster types, and of course at the time of its launch, radically changed the gameplay from a fixed camera tank control style to the origin of the modern third-person shooter. A very controversial move at the time by Resident Evil purists, but the game industry at large does thank them for their innovation. With all that said though, it's still very enjoyable and one really fun ride start to finish. And considering the series is known for twists and turns and interesting new characters, this game really brought a lot of those to the forefront, especially the villains being some of the most memorable in the franchise. Now, while the story's tone at the time of the original launch may have led to some fans being not as impressed considering its campy nature, honestly, it's insane how well the story and comedic elements hold up even to today, and its voice acting and dialogue was leagues better than what came before it.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
And for the most part, the story holds true in the remake, it only having some slight variations that I'll discuss later on in the video.
Nature calls, huh? I'll be right back.
Let's be honest, Resident Evil 4 looks amazing, and while I wouldn't call the social output screen a one-to-one representation of quality, the foveated rendering does a lot to bring the crisp visuals to life in the headset. Also, for as much as I've heard about the Mura on PSVR 2 since its launch, I've hardly ever heard anyone talk about how great the HDR is and how realistic lights and God rays look on PSVR 2. The headset having OLED panels really is a game changer when it comes to horror games or games that take place at night, and Resident Evil 4 in particular absolutely nails the experience using the flashlight, fires, and sunlight to create dynamic lighting systems that, while I don't think uses ray tracing in its VR mode, still appears highly detailed and super realistic. Another small detail that gets perfect is the muzzle flash of your guns, fires, and barrel explosions. The explosions themselves look so good, I honestly couldn't tell you if an explosion causes the headset haptics to activate or just the vibrance and realism of it makes it that much more immersive. The amazing lighting and effects wouldn't be that great though without detailed environments and great textures, and just wow, the graphical and aesthetic upgrade from the original game is downright breathtaking. Now, I'll always love the original game in its entirety, but moving the game to visually line up more with Resident Evil 7 and Village is just brilliant. From bone medallions, clothing lines moving in the breeze, and puzzle statues leaking blood, the way darker and foreboding atmosphere makes the game excel at both respecting the source material and bringing it more in line with the modern vision of the franchise. And even though many of the basic ganados look very similar to one another, they are highly detailed and have some way creepier animations than the original game. The boss battles and sense of scale will absolutely crush expectations of newcomers to VR, and I think that the most impressive thing in the game is parasite transformations, and just the overall gore in this game is insane. And my goodness, there is a lot of gore in this game. Headshots completely break apart the head, leaving tendrils, blood, and bone in its place. A well-placed abdomen shot will blow off the top half of an enemy's body, and you can see the spinal cord and the remnants of the Las Plagas. Of course, bodies, animals, and remnants of cult rituals can be found in the environments of the game, and they all look very grimy and gross, just perfect for this game and its setting. I also like that they added a few new enemy types. It does help break up the earlier areas and make them feel just different enough from the original game, and adds a touch more of the sinister cult elements to the earlier portions of the game. Both Resident Evil 4 Remake and the original also features a wide variety of different locations and settings that are really perfect in variety, yet still feel very connected and believable within the setting of the game. In fact, I remember watching a developer documentary where the lead designer of Resident Evil Village mentioned how much inspiration they took from Resident Evil 4, and after revisiting the game's environments, even if they are slightly different from the original game and graphically updated, it does really cement how much inspiration Village did take from this game. The only thing is, I still believe Resident Evil 4 does a better job in feeling consistently believable across all its locations, where Village, as much as I love the game and each area of the map independently, it kind of lacks the level of consistency and feel, especially when you get to Heisenberg's factory in that game. So yeah, to wrap it up, this is one of the current best looking PSVR 2 games, and to be honest, it's one of the best looking VR games in general. And I would absolutely love to see people's first reaction to VR be in this game, and it would be just so reminiscent of my own experience with Resident Evil 7 being my first VR game, and the massive leap in quality would just be mind-blowing to experience for the first time. It's a first-person Resident Evil, but in VR. Okay, that may be a bit of an oversimplification. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a semi-survival horror action shooter, and while that may sound at odds with itself, honestly, it can be, but in the best way possible. So let's start out with the semi-survival horror. While most games in the survival horror genre are known for pretty unforgiving level of careful resource management, Resident Evil 4 says the hell with it and gives you a healthy amount of ammunition, grenades, and healing items, but it also gives you a pretty large group of enemies to deal with. This constantly puts you in a state of having enough ammo to deal with enemies, but not enough to completely be wasteful with it, so it can become challenging to exhibit crowd control while also trying to have some level of conservation of resources. When this is combined with VR and dealing with weapons that have small ammo clips that need to be manually reloaded, it turns a difficult encounter into a very frantic situation at times. I mean, sure, it's as easy as any VR game. Release the clip, grab a fresh one from your ammo pouch, put it in, and cock the slide. But have you ever seen a regenerator in VR? It's stressful and it really makes it hard to not just completely empty a clip, which adds the feedback loop of the survival horror elements. If Resident Evil 4 didn't have this masterful balance of ammo and enemies, the game would be a little more lost on its action-focused gameplay. Limited inventory space and item management also goes a long way in increasing the survival elements and the way you play. You can't just carry every weapon on your person, they take up inventory slots, and of course lead to everyone's favorite Tetris minigame. This makes it a balancing act between buying or selling weapons to get new ones, and unlike Resident Evil 7, it doesn't have an item box, so you have to sell and buy back weapons from the merchant. Luckily, you don't just have to sell all your items for money, but you can find merchant contracts that ask you to find collectibles or complete little tasks, and it will reward you with money. And of course, keeping an eye out around the environment for gems and treasures is a must, because combining them will net you lots of money from the merchant. Having plenty of funding and dealing with the merchant will allow you to not only pay for new weapons, but also upgrade them to do more damage, have better ammo capacity, or in the case of your combat knife, increase its durability and even repair it. While VR revives some of the intensity, the game still is no Resident Evil 7 when it comes to the survival horror. It's still a very set-piece, heavy, and action-focused title. However, that's really okay because it does have some of the better boss battles in the franchise, and the gunplay goes hard in this game. This may have my favorite shotgun in any game ever. It just feels so weighted and punchy with the perfect amount of recoil. It's so satisfying to get headshots with, and the base pistol is also very useful when used correctly, aka stunning enemies and having Leon use his signature roundhouse kick to take them out. And there are so many weapons to get, from sniper rifles to grenade and rocket launchers, even special weapons that are hidden around the map. However, in my opinion, the most important weapon in this game got the largest gameplay change that everyone has been raving about, and that is the combat knife, and it's getting praised for very good reason. It completely changes up the feeling of playing this game in VR, because now you not only have the ability to live through a chainsaw attack, but being able to parry enemy attacks is an absolute game changer. I mean, it's been years since I played the original game on the flat screen, but I honestly don't ever remember using knives to parry attacks, just a lot of defensive moves with the knife, and this is by far the most satisfying thing to do for me personally, besides getting a great headshot with the shotgun. You can also use it for some minor stealth-based kills, or as a final blow when an enemy is about to have a second wind from the parasite. But you can also just simply hack Ganados to death with it, and that's just as awesome. In fact, it just feels like such a natural extension of the game, and it definitely is a highlight of the VR experience. As I mentioned earlier though, the knife can break since it has a durability meter, but you can find kitchen knives or just constantly repair it when you see the merchant, which is what I did. As far as gameplay goes, it's just simple fun. I mean, I would have loved to see Capcom do something cool with the PSVR 2's eye tracking capability, but not having the feature doesn't really take anything away from the experience. I think I only have two real complaints. First off, grenades and flashbangs don't have a pin pulling mechanic, and I don't want to pull the pins for the immersive factor, but rather so I don't just accidentally grab a grenade and then drop it to the ground, causing it to explode right under my feet, and that's happened many times. And the other thing is, ever since I've played Crossfire Sierra Squad, I'll kind of forever be spoiled by the way you can steady the sniper rifle in that game, and I really want every VR game to have a steady mechanic like that. Other than those minor complaints, the VR gameplay is among some of the most satisfying I've played all year long. However, some people on the internet don't feel the same way, and for this next section, I'd recommend holding onto your butts because I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
So Resident Evil 4 Remake is a perfect example of how tons of people online complain about how immersive a VR game should be, and it's honestly reaching a point of absurdity. Like, some people are complaining that it just feels too much like a third-person game ported to VR, which is literally exactly what it is, but the complaints come from a place of it lacking object interactivity or how you push buttons for some interactions like using ladders or picking up objects or breaking barrels. Like, I get some people feel like this isn't VR enough, but here's the reality of it. We already have so many games that let you pick up every object in the whole game and throw them, climb ladders with physical movement. Basically, all this level of interactivity that Resident Evil 4 Remake delegates to buttons. My question is, does any of the interactivity of those games actually make them more fun or better experiences? I mean, I guess it could, but it can also make them just feel so much more clunkier than they actually need to be. I've said in many videos that I believe accessibility and options are great and really should be included by developers, and maybe you'll think I'm less of a VR gamer for this, but what about people who wish more games would offer a streamlined experience like Resident Evil 4 does? Honestly, online, they're often met with like rebuttals by the extreme VR community who are purist and think that everything in VR needs to be done a very one-way specific structure. And that's just not true. That's not game design. Game design is varied and different, and all sorts of games have all sorts of different control schemes and styles of playing. Resident Evil 4 is just far less clunky when you only have to press a button to pick up the ammo or the items, especially when you're in the heat of the action. And people who want this kind of gameplay experience are rarely catered to in the VR landscape, and most of us don't complain about the other games. We just fight through the clunky elements. So even if this is a hot take and I get called a less than VR gamer, I think the compromises that it makes in this game provide a better experience, and that is a good thing. The level of interaction that it does have is perfectly crafted to feel great and add to the experience, and so I'm okay with it not using these traditional VR controls that become clunky in 90% of other games. And we can't lie about this, VR community. We have to acknowledge the fact that a ton of VR games are clunky. That is immersive braking. It is not immersive braking if I pick up something with X. I don't know. I can't believe the VR community complains about such trivial stuff, and I understand the hypocrisy of me doing this, but I had to, because it's just becoming agitating that we get good games that are coming to VR and people are complaining about it. I don't understand that. All right, so this rant may seem a bit excessive, but I needed to say it because if the VR community keeps about the actual good AAA VR games we get, the bigger companies are going to start caring less and less about making these modes available. This in turn will lead to less general consumers being interested in getting and supporting VR, leading to even less games for VR in general because the gaming market starts shrinking. And by the way, I'm not saying stay silent or shut up or anything like that. I'm saying state your concerns and ask developers to add options that you personally enjoy. But if they choose not to pick your favorite control scheme, don't write off the whole game, and don't complain about it nonstop online or say that it sucks. Just play it and enjoy the experiences that the developers designed it to be, and you'll just feel much better in the long run. I mean, can you imagine the most hardcore Resident Evil fan in the 90s growing up and never playing any other Resident Evil game after that because of the control scheme changing? I mean, come on, guys. We can be critical, we can have opinions, but let's not say that it's a lesser than game because of a different control scheme.
That went well.
Now, this isn't a definitive list, but it's the ones that were noticeable to me, and it will have some spoilers, so if you're unfamiliar with the story and want to experience it yourself, please skip to the next section where I'll just have a very basic overall summary of how faithful the game is. So I think Capcom learned a lot from Resident Evil 3 Remake, and while I personally did enjoy that game, many people, myself included, did not like how vastly different it was from the original game, with a lot of cut content, and the Nemesis encounters never felt as spontaneous as they did in the original game. Luckily for Resident Evil 4 Remake, they did keep it much closer in line with the original experience. It's still not without its changes though, so we will start with the small things like the opening of the game being just slightly different, with one of the drivers being killed in the basement of the first house Leon goes into, and the entire opening part takes place at night instead of the daytime, which is a very welcome change to the game's atmosphere and much more in line with the modern games aesthetically. Also in line with the modern atmosphere, there is a lot less sexual innuendos towards Ashley and Ingrid, and this is fine and doesn't really change anything. And there is also a few alterations to character wardrobes. Most notably is Ada, who isn't in her red dress, but a more tactical outfit this time around. Getting into actual game alterations, I'm sure there are many more than what I'm stating, but you have the wolf that's stuck in the bear trap. It's now in a different location. The garden maze in the castle plays out differently due to Ashley being more involved, and Lewis goes through the mines with you and also aids you in the fight against the two El Gigantes. Once again, those are no big deal, but probably the biggest changes come from the new enemies that will surprise you in different spots, or even the lack of Leon's encounter with U3 altogether. And I haven't tried the Separate Ways DLC yet. I'm unsure if it works in VR, but they did make a new boss battle against U3 in that where you play as Ada, so it's not really like super offensive of a change because they did at least add it back in some capacity. Lewis does die differently in the remake, but this, along with the U3 fight being nixed, does allow the fleshing out of fighting Krauser, and it's no longer just a QTE sequence. By far the biggest change though is the addition of Wesker at the ending, as he never appeared in the original Resident Evil 4, but I have a hunch that this is to lay the groundwork for more Capcom remakes, and I hope that we keep getting VR modes for all of those. So yeah, overall the game is pretty faithful to the original with some changes just like we've seen with other remakes, but Capcom didn't do the complete gutting like Resident Evil 3 Remake did, and the great thing is, from what I remember of playing Resident Evil 4 on Quest, this is identical to the original with the advent of it being in first-person VR, so if you really do want to sacrifice the graphics and the darker atmosphere for the more campy and iconic original experience, you still are welcome to do that on the Quest platform. Now I know the Game Awards just happened and VR Game of the Year went to Resident Evil Village, which is also a very great game, but I think I like this one better, and that's because they simply nailed the balance between a fun and action-packed experience, all while maintaining a level of horror that is enjoyable and respecting the original game. I'll be completely truthful in saying that this might edge out Resident Evil Village for me personally because of the nostalgia around it, and of course I actually waited to play this one in VR versus Village that I played on the TV on launch day, so it just hit a little bit differently this time around. All that said, I absolutely hope that diehard Resident Evil 4 fans will invest into PlayStation VR 2 for this game and come to realize how far the technology has come. This really is one of the killer apps for the platform and a fantastic ending for the year of 2023 on PSVR 2. Now Capcom, please remaster the Resident Evil 7 and bring it to PSVR 2. But that concludes my thoughts on Resident Evil 4 Remake in virtual reality. But as always, now it's time to hear from you guys. I want to know, are you enjoying the game right now? Or have you been on the fence about PSVR 2 and this is really finally inspiring you to pick one up for yourself? You can let me know the answer to all those questions and more in the comment section down below. It is right past that like button. And of course, if you've made it this far in the video and you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? But in all seriousness, I hope to see you in the next video. Later.
Hasta luego.